This is a little unorthodox, but with Final Fantasy 16 out now at the time of this video, I think it's time for us to take one last big look at an example of how to not make a Final Fantasy game.
Hello everyone, it is I, the Obsessive Gamer, and today we'll of course be talking about Final Fantasy 2, because who thought that it was a good idea to have a leveling up system for each of your skills and attacking your own teammates to level up? I mean, oh right, the actual disaster.
For this, we need to step back all the way to 2006, the same year where we got bangers like
Ridge Racer
and
Giant Enemy Crab.
And of course where we were first shown the trailer for Final Fantasy Versus 13. This was unveiled at the same time as Final Fantasy 13's trailer, which looked neat, and the usual CGI trailer that will reflect nothing of the final game that Square is known for. But then came the Versus 13 trailer, and whoa, did this look amazing. It was dark, brutal, stylish, and was in a modern cityscape. Versus 13 here was bringing in major players at Square Enix, like Kazushige Nojima, writer of Final Fantasy 7, 8, and 10, Yoko Shimomura, the composer of many video games including Kingdom Hearts and Xenoblade, Yoshinori Kitase, who had been a long-standing director and producer of many Square Enix games, and of course Tetsuya Nomura, who was the face of the Kingdom Hearts series and worked on many Final Fantasy games too. The spin-off here was looking much better than Final Fantasy 13 with all these things behind it. None of this bright white stuff here. Get this quarter shit out of my way for my boy here. But then over the years, the game kept getting pushed back further and further, but we also kept getting shown more and more, from the tagline of a fantasy based on reality to deeper story elements such as the main female Stella being heavily intertwined with the protagonist Noctis, a political rivalry between the kingdoms, and gameplay resembling Kingdom Hearts. What did we get? None of that! Okay, I guess we got a game after 10 years of hype.
We'll start with the gameplay, because this is the first Final Fantasy that is a action RPG, and this indeed pisses off all of the turn-based schmucks into even attacking a game like Final Fantasy 16, despite it being right now a turn-based renaissance in gaming.
At first, it seemed pretty cool with the ability to play as Noctis and do all these neat warp strikes to everyone and everything. It almost felt like Final Fantasy could work well as an action RPG here. But as you play, you notice a glaring flaw. The game is too damn easy. You can literally just hold down the action button and Noctis does a chain of attacks. That Kingdom Hearts gameplay that we were promised and uses actual combat strategy and button presses? Not here, just a very dumbed down combat system. Oh, I'm sorry, you could push a direction to make Noctis do something different. Wow, that literally means nothing at all to complicate this already easy game. Along with that, to make it even easier, Noctis' Armiger special was basically a hold X to win button. It looks all fancy, like you're doing a lot, but realistically, the game is playing itself. To top it off, there is no hard mode, only easy and normal. I was like, maybe they'll do an update to give us a hard mode. Hell, I held off on another playthrough in hopes of that, but nope, never happened. The directions you can press to change your attack chain, the large variety of weapons, absolutely useless. Now originally you could only play as Noctis, this of course being very odd for a Final Fantasy game which always had multiple party members. Of course 1 year after release is when a free DLC enabled the ability to play the other three bros in game. Sounds like a rush game! Which is weird considering it was 10 years in the can by release, but we'll circle back to that later. The other three party members control rather well, each with their own unique gameplay style. What is jarring, however, is that when not controlled, the AI plays them very differently. You can easily see the glaring problem here of how they shoehorned this in from the DLC with their own unique styles just to shut people up like me who complained about the lack of characters in this Final Fantasy mainline game, and yet here I am, still complaining. But this is just the combat side of gameplay. Let's look at the overworld. The game presented us with a rather nice overworld for us to explore in the form of Lucius. It's stunning and looks great. It's classic Final Fantasy in 3D, which is very refreshing after the linear hallways of 13. It's full of side quests and side dungeons you could do with somewhat of an okay reward. The problem here is that it's rather underutilized for the main story. Yeah, you could run around the map or slowly drive around it, but only to some sections. A large chunk of the map is not even used for the main story. In old Final Fantasies, you'd go practically all over the place and only a small handful were left for side quests. Here, almost all of it is for side questing in some form. Worse is the second half of the game. After the autoplay Armiger fight with Leviathan, you end up in a new continent. That sounds great, right? Like in Final Fantasy IX, where you suddenly end up in a completely different land to explore. Well, you're on a train for almost all of it. And we know this wasn't the original intention, as through a glitch to go out of bounds, you can find a lot of explorable land around, which also includes roads you normally would be able to drive on, and hell, even Cindy's tow truck is here. Some of this land, the snow area specifically, was later utilized and updated for episode Prompto, which of course Square forced us to pay extra to play and explore an area that was already on disc. But there is a clear problem between both Lucius and this continent of Niflheim in the second half of the game. They appear unfinished. While Lucius looks finished, it is underutilized for the main story. Meanwhile, Niflheim's content is actually unfinished, so the story was crudely stitched together to be on a train instead. Eventually, when in the Niflheim capital, you can't even explore that. It's basically just a linear bad dungeon you are in. It was so bad that it gave me Final Fantasy XIII vibes with its linearity. Maybe worse?
Maybe you weren't so bad all along, and for that, I'm sorry. And just for that too, maybe I'll move you up a tier in the FF scale. I've got nuts. I'm talking to a box.
What made it worse was that it was extra heavy in using the Ring of Lucius and a slow grind through a large chunk of it. This area was so bad that the devs made a new version of it shortly after release as free DLC. So by the end of the Niflheim continent section, Noctis is put to sleep for 10 years and wakes up to the World of Ruin, where monsters now plague the whole world and people have armed themselves and their cities to fight for survival. Sounds great, right? You can now go back to a very different Lucius and see how it changed and how its people have grown, but wait, it's Corridor Hell once again! Right after you wake up, you're taken straight to the Hammerhead gas station and then go literally to the last area of the game instead. No exploring, just preparing for the final battle. How underwhelming is that? Can't truly say how much of this was by design, but good design would have been to split your party members throughout Lucius, as they should be fully busy on their own missions. Therefore, you go and collect them and encounter many of those dungeons that are currently just side quest material but now integrated into the story. This way, we learn of the current world, the characters, and how they've grown while actually further utilizing the Lucius map. Then after this, we have a full team ready for the final boss. At this point, we get to the final area, which is of course, Insomnia. It's fine and works as a final area as it's the main capital, which Noctis' ancient blood relative Arden is waiting. No gameplay issues here except for the final boss. By tradition, Final Fantasy final bosses are impressive. They appear threatening, overwhelming in stature, and actually do decent damage so long as you aren't overleveled. Arden has 3 phases, one on foot, one in the sky, and then on foot again? Wait, what? Something is off here. Why is the third form a lot like the first one? Usually the staple third form is a big bad monster form of sorts that is somewhat of a tough fight. Well, it appears a monster form did exist for Arden at one point, but apparently it was removed because of time constraints. Again, why was there time constraints in a game with 10 years of development? Too early to tackle that yet. But wow, is that disappointing. It could have been a satisfying finish considering Arden had all of the Star Scourge within him that he could use to become a giant monster of sorts. While the whole battle was one-on-one, the final part could have brought together all your 3 brothers for one final team attack in a game that was supposed to be about Brotherhood, which of course instead tied it down to a lone Noctis fighting a rehash of the first part of the battle, which was way too easy. However, the Arden DLC does exactly that, except you are the bad guy this time. Sure, you don't transform, but still, after you mop the floor enough with Noctis, his friends show up. Why couldn't this be patched in? This actually felt like a better final fight than the actual final fight here. None of this makes sense! In fact, one thing that really annoyed me was the quest to get all 13 of Noctis' royal arms. The game originally presents it as if it's a main story requirement. What you realize is that it was never even required for anything. It was just a side quest to get these overpowered weapons that in the end are not even needed for this easy game. I guess the Royal Edition did at least add in that if you did collect all 13, that you got this really neat special attack. It looks very impressive, but again, you usually don't need such an overpowered move in the end. I realistically think by collecting all these, it should have led to an alternate ending of sorts. Maybe the final boss's actual monster form that I mentioned not too far back. Maybe all 13 would be required to beat him in that form. All in all, gameplay wise, while it can be somewhat spammy fun, it's a rushed mess. All that we were shown is practically not there, from its combat being totally different to the overworld being far more limited, as we lost many major cities like Noctis' hometown Insomnia and Tenebrae, and having the unfinished and unplayable continent in the form of Niflheim. This of course being aside from it being too damn easy.
While there are other problems we could be talking about in the gameplay department, let's move on to the other mess of a problem, the story.
The game has you start off dragging your car to the gas station known as Hammerhead to be fixed, which supposedly Prince Noctis of Insomnia and his friends are trying to prepare him to marry his fiancée, Luna Freya. Shortly into the game, a quick couple of shots are showed and well, the city of Insomnia has fallen. What? This feels rather sudden, and now the group has to basically dodge the Niflheim Empire, which destroyed Insomnia. Now already just a bit into the game, we see huge problems with the story. Why did this happen? How did this happen? Why couldn't we see or be there? In fact, what was Insomnia even as a city? Who were they? Oh wait! Square Enix wants us to buy this stupid Blu-ray movie and see what happens! And if you were like me, who had been following the game's development since 2006, you'd be questioning as to what happened to all that gameplay footage of Noctis and his company in Insomnia. Just like with the other stuff that remained incomplete that I mentioned earlier, so did this. They cut it out altogether. Now okay, cutting out an open explorable area but still having some linear game and story around there can still get a pass. But this to myself and many others after 10 years of being teased about playing as Noctis trying to escape the badass Niflheim invasion and a very powerful hook to a story was a highly disappointing factor. I mean, other than it being really badass to play and defeat all these soldiers in an escape through an urban setting, this part was highly important to the story in many aspects. Now some may have not been following the game like myself and just picked it up when they saw a new Final Fantasy game to even know that this was supposed to be in the game originally, but it still caused a massive problem of cutting out the hook to the whole story. In basic storytelling, what you need to truly get the story off the ground first is a hook. Something that really gets the audience really interested in the story that is to come forth. The Niflheim invasion was just that. It started off with a bang. It was the game's bombing mission from Final Fantasy VII, except even more exciting. All we ended up getting in the end is boobs and shittier Monster Hunter to start off the game. I know some might say that if one watches the movie first and then the game, they already got their hook that way.
For those of you who are saying that, you are saying that you're okay with Square Enix scamming you an extra fee on top of the game's purchase for a story that was supposed to be in the game in the first place.
But why does it have to be separate from the game? I want to play the game here as an isolated piece. And also, why does it star some nobody and not Noctis? In fact, this not being Noctis causes other problems. What we didn't see is how Noctis and his friends lived and interacted with the city. Yes, again, we had those external sources of video called Brotherhood, which is free on YouTube at least, but why outside of the game? And I'm also talking about seeing them in the modern Insomnia and not in the past. We could have seen Noctis and company interact with people, Noctis interacting with his father, and hell, Noctis actually interacting with his fiancée Luna Freya, a whole subject I'll get to shortly. And as a player, being able to see and explore the city so that once this invasion happens, the impact could be stronger to us as we saw this and experienced it firsthand. And as such, the impact could have been even stronger on Noctis and his crew after seeing all these people and their families being slaughtered right in front of them. This also tying into the ending. When you return to Insomnia at the end to fight Arden, combined with the emotional track Somnus playing to this destroyed city, it felt like as a player along with Noctis and co, we should be feeling very emotional due to what we experienced at the start of the game. Especially now being at the end of what is a very long journey that even included a time skip at that. But that feeling is lost because we couldn't experience it in the game as the player, nor could Noctis and company themselves. The sad part here is that the movie that replaced it wasn't cheap in any way, shape or form. That money could have went into finishing the invasion, especially since, as seen through all those trailers, Insomnia was quite built up already. It didn't need to even be that expensive. It could have just been a couple streets and buildings, much like in the final game, but still have that gameplay and story we saw together that originally hooked us in to be used as both the tutorial and the hook of the story. It could have then led to them escaping in a car out of the city, which mind you, they even have a CG scene in those old trailers of exactly that, and opening up near Hammerhead, where the car stops working because of trying to escape gunfire and all this other destruction.
Well, the answer is rather clear. Square Enix wanted this game wrapped up rather quickly because they already spent a lot of time on it. And so they dished out a lot of money just to meet the deadline by making this dumb film.
As stated before, if they did have Insomnia in the game at start, we'd also likely have much more interaction with Luna Freya. Throughout the game, Luna is seen and hinted at, but Noctis almost never interacts with her. This is such a huge flaw that it led to being one of people's highest choices in a character that deserves a DLC to show more of them, and even outside of that, the devs did already release additional free DLC showing a bit of background on her later. Even outside of interaction, Luna is just such a flat and boring character. She hardly ever shows any real personality. She is just a monotone oracle in the end. As some of you don't know by now, Luna was a replacement for the character Stella that I mentioned earlier. Stella played a very different role and even appeared to be somewhat antagonistic to Noctis in these trailers, something that Luna never was. In fact, in those original trailers, you saw a lot of interaction between Stella and Noctis. The game in fact opened up to them talking at a party. Actually, a nice video even exists showcasing how it would have sounded with a dub over it. Let's take a quick listen.
So, how about it? Did you receive any power?
I don't think I'd want anything like that. I'm fine the way I am.
That's what I thought. No matter the power, if it's at the cost of someone's life, it would give me nightmares.
Me too. Good thing it's just a fairy tale.
In my opinion, that one sequence did a lot more for their character and relationship development than the entire game did for Noctis and Luna. Concept art also exists where Noctis and Stella, even when separated, speak together on their cell phones, which oddly enough, even that never happened between Luna and Noctis. You'd think they'd at least try to showcase a few wave files of Luna when Noctis is talking to her over the phone to build it up a bit, but nope. I mean, I'd forgive Square if this was their first take on trying to do relationships in a game.
Okay, I can't even finish this line. It's so hilarious because they are well experienced in making love stories, so much so that they used to get flack back then for it. Whether it be games for like Final Fantasy VIII or Final Fantasy X, to the point where they have the same writers even making this game too.
In fact, the Luna relationship felt so non-existent that I thought at one point the game wanted to give us an option to date someone else when they let us go on a date with Gladio's sister Iris. That date was 1,000 times better than any interaction I had seen between Noctis and Luna, and Iris actually had a personality too at that. But of course, at the end of the date, you are instantly told that nothing can happen between them, because Noctis is with Luna.
Who the hell actually wrote this story? Let's see. These three schmucks? Well, let's see what they've actually done. Oh. None of them actually seem to have an actual wiki profile. Are they trying to hide their profile because they wrote one good character and they took it away from us?
Okay, enough about this terrible relationship. Let's look at Noctis' other ties with his friends and company. There isn't too much complaints about Ignis, Gladio, and Prompto, as they all have rather good personalities, niches, and interactions with Noctis, but the problem is that we hardly get anything about their character. Again, stemming the question, who are they, why are they here, how are they going to grow as characters? The first two, of course, aren't even answered in the game, but rather in those damn Brotherhood videos on YouTube, which give a short background on their character. Again, it's out of game, something that shouldn't even be needed. But before further delving on that, the third question of how they grow is where the characters lose the most points. Throughout the story, it appears that all they do is try to help Noctis. but we don't see them as characters actually face any personal conflicts that they have to overcome, or grow even as characters. They remain the same type of people throughout the whole game. The game, however, purposely left 3 empty gaps where each of these characters leave for a certain period of time, and you have no idea why.
Why did they do this? Because Square wants to scam us with 3 more DLCs.
I guess if you were to play the DLCs, which run about 2 hours apiece, you do see each of them within their own conflict, and even grow as characters. They are fantastic actually, and tell a story that both shows their development of their character, resolve, and pushing the overall story forward. Heck, those small bits are somehow better than the actual game. How much were you out to screw over Nomura's golden child here, Square? However, that's all there is, only a 2-hour segment for their whole character arc in a JRPG, which are never supposed to be short, and this isn't an exception either. In my opinion, their character arcs should have been dispersed throughout the game. Gladio struggling to try and be a better shield for Noctis. Prompto having to try and figure out who he is, where he came from, and why he is in some ways tied to originally being from the Niflheim Empire. And Ignis as a character trying to work on improving further on keeping them maintained and deciding the best course of action for Noctis and the group. And even tie in the Brotherhood episodes in-game to all these character developments, and maybe even tie in their hobbies too as their goals and dreams, whether it be Prompto's photography or Ignis's cooking. If this is a game about Brotherhood, it should have been much more about them too, and not just Noctis as we saw in game. Instead, all we got was a game focused only on him. Remember that 10-year skip I mentioned, and how Lucius should have been explorable, and how in fact Noctis should have had to find his friends throughout the world of Ruin? These could have in fact been utilized to further evolve their characters to show how much they've grown and changed while Noctis missed out over the past decade. Maybe even some flashbacks to some tough instances they faced. Thus, overall, for a game that is about Brotherhood, this game truly missed the mark in my opinion. But other than these, as stated earlier, they skipped a lot in the game once you start riding the train through the Niflheim continent, as evident with all the out-of-bound glitches. This skipped a whole continent of story we could have had. While it's a mystery as to what a lot of it could have been, as possibilities could even include them having to sneakingly try to cross through to get into the Niflheim Empire's capital by hitting up many more towns. However, this could have further showed how the local people felt about the Niflheim occupation of their land and gotten a better understanding of the politics going on at their doorstep. But the one major area in this continent that was missed out on was Tenebrae, the country of Luna Freya. You hear about this place all game, see it in flashbacks, and footage of Luna living there. It appeared like some dream world that the devs have been dangling in front of you the whole time and saying, I'm sure you can't wait to get here and see what it's all about. And when you arrive by train and all excited to finally see what this place that was talked about heavily in the game was all about, you end up only seeing that you can't enter it. You just stand outside, awkwardly, as the city stares down at you, laughing at some dumb Lucius prince that can't enter it due to the developers saying no. What a horrible letdown. This could have been a good place to have gotten even more background on Luna and her character, her life, her people, lineage, the whole role of the Oracle, and how the country was occupied and felt about the Niflheim Empire. This especially would have been pivotal, as the next area was literally the Niflheim capital, and much like Tenebrae, you don't get much in the Niflheim capital either. I mean, you at least are inside it, but it's basically a dungeon. You don't learn a damn thing about the city. You don't see what the people think of their king, how Star Scourge is affecting the people, comparison of culture to the contrasting insomnia, etc. This should have basically been, in a way, a reverse Midgar, in that you hit it near the end of the game instead, and you enter it rather than leave it. Much like Midgar, it could have been avoiding the Empire while trying to slowly make your way to the Crystal, and having a final showdown with the Empire, which I might add, never even happened! We honestly never had a proper final showdown with its king. It could have basically been Noctis' revenge for his father's death even. A climatic emotional battle with the head of the Empire that tore down his home and family. And while we are on the topic of the Empire, let's talk about Ravis, who is Luna's brother. This character was truly wasted potential. Literally was just some angry dude who didn't want his sister marrying the freaking Prince of Lucius. All we got was that he was just some guy working for the Niflheim Empire as a general and supposedly after Noctis and company as such. However, that's all he was. We didn't see how he felt about the Empire as the game progressed, what he thought of Noctis throughout the game, his personal backstory in relation to Luna, and why he had such a strong dislike of Noctis. In the base game, we didn't even see what he thought when Luna died. It wasn't until Episode Ignis when we saw his emotions and feelings. In fact, Episode Ignis did a lot for Ravis. It gave him more personality, emotion, and actually thinking for himself for a change rather than being an Empire shill. Yet again, more highway robbery by Square Enix to see the full story. Realistically, Ravis should have been appearing more throughout the game and kinda like a rival to Noctis. Some Final Fantasy games have this rival character that goes toe-to-toe with the protagonist throughout the game. Squall with Cypher, Avalanche and the Turks, Lightning and Sid. Yeah, I wasn't expecting to ever bring up Final Fantasy XIII as a good example of storytelling either. In fact, the whole intention of Ravis was originally to be the rival to Noctis. We saw him heavily in those trailers as a hooded figure, including this popular scene of him standing off against Noctis with Noctis' blades drawn around him and Ravis' magic over Noctis. In fact, if you took out Ravis out of this game, the game could still function just as fine. That's how pointless he was to the story in the end. Another major topic the game dropped the ball on was Star Scourge. Star Scourge was a plague that afflicted the people of Eos, turning them into daemons, lengthening the nights, and overall destroying the world as such. It did a very bad job of introducing it, and did it rather late into the game too. Again, within the problematic chapter 13, it starts to appear, and how you find out about it is by reading these notes that are scattered. This isn't too strange in many series, especially Resident Evil, but up to this point in the game, everything was basically presented to us visually. In fact, a lot of these notes led to more confusion over the understanding of Star Scourge. Of course, eventually when they redid Chapter 13, we got more of a background on it on a visual level, and saw characters being infected with it and turning into daemons. If this was a side plot, I could overlook it, but it ended up being essential to the main plot, and very late into the game at that. If we could actually see and interact with people suffering from it much more throughout the game, turning into daemons, and even hints of where it's coming from, that could have made it work much better. It's not exactly a strong plot device on its own, but tied to the whole story and the main villain Ardyn, it can be quite strong. Which brings me to my next point. Our villain Ardyn Lucius Caelum, better known as Ardyn Izunia of course. Ardyn was someone who was rather unexpectedly turned into a villain at some point in the game. They hinted him to having a hidden motive throughout the game, which worked. However, what we never understood is what was his motivation? For some reason, Ardyn basically was trying to kill off the Lucius bloodline, and for another odd reason had access to a great deal of Star Scourge without actually affecting him negatively. None of this was ever truly addressed. All we assumed was that he was a jealous old ancestor who wanted to kill off his brother's bloodline. Even then, it left many questions, including why go through letting the Star Scourge loose on the world in the first place. And guess what? Another paid DLC of episode Ardyn and animation on YouTube to see his motivation. Basically, Star Scourge was plaguing the land, with his brother Somnus, who was a ruthless man, killing anyone who had it, while Ardyn was curing people and taking the Star Scourge within himself. But soon, Ardyn, who was set to be the next king of Lucius, was usurped by his brother, deemed unfit, which led to Somnus killing his fiancée and even chaining Ardyn, who had become unkillable due to all the Star Scourge for 2 millennia, leading to Ardyn having a strong hate for the Lucius bloodline. And so Niflheim later finds and frees him, where he is set loose to wreak havoc on Insomnia, which leads him to even almost killing King Regis and taking his revenge until stopped by Bahamut, who says that Ardyn is to instead spread Star Scourge throughout the world and have Noctis eventually kill him while also satisfying his revenge, which Ardyn is reluctantly forced to accept. This makes the whole story around both Star Scourge and Ardyn rather strong as such, and really is a shame that it actually wasn't in the game to give a real motivation as to who he is for when we go into the final battle. If shown mid-game, it could have been like the Sephiroth flashback of this game, down to even being playable. Imagine having all this foreknowledge that was spread throughout the game, and then entering into the final battle knowing why he did this, and what he wants to actually accomplish. It would make for a much deeper battle as such. But now let's talk about the endgame here. So, considering how Ardyn is immortal, the only way was to kill his soul, right after he dies for those mere moments before coming back to life. As such, what we had was Noctis killing himself at the end of the game just to do that. Like, I am not a fan of suicide endings, or the protagonist dying cheaply at the end of a story, but even if I put my biases aside, it's just stupid. The problem stems from Arden himself, and brings upon a classic trope of where the writer makes the villain so strong that he's written himself into a corner of how the hell do you actually beat him? Many classic examples of this exist from writers including the hack known as Tide Kubo of Bleach with Aizen. Arden being immortal as such does just that, so coming up with a proper solution to kill him for good is not that easy. The problem is that the character Noctis that we learned and grew with, overcoming Luna's death over time, and standing strong to reclaim the throne and bring a new age of light to the people, doesn't seem like the type of person to choose to kill himself in order to solve this problem at all. Thus, it's a cheap way to handle Arden's OP abilities. Some of you might be fine with how this went down, but I know it's lazy simply because the director of the game, Hajime Tabata, likes to kill off his protagonists. It seems like it's his easy way out for all his games, and well, it's worked before. Tabata here, however, had his hands tied as he took over a game that was in development hell and ended up shoehorning his usual kill the protagonist trope in the end too. Thus, the ending wasn't ever met with great reception. This is why episode Ignis presented an alternate ending, where during those 10 years of sleep, Ignis took a company of people who did research as to how to stop Arden's immortality, or as the theory goes, as it's quite vague actually. In fact, that ending got so much praise that a whole set of DLC episodes were announced to make a proper ending. However, they were unfortunately cancelled, and now only out as a book.
Okay, let me get this straight. So Square Enix wants me to buy the game, 4 pieces of DLC, a movie, and an additional book. And this all comes out to $136. Oh wait, there's the Royal Pass too, which brings us to $156. The worst part is, I'm Canadian. That's $206 right there, boys. $206 for the whole Final Fantasy 15 experience here. $206 that is going to be spent on actually good Final Fantasy games if I actually was smart back then. But oh wait, there's more, because I actually could have bought the Royal Edition of the game, which comes with the 3 DLCs, not including Arden, the base game, and of course the Royal Pass for a flat fee of $59.99 US. And that only leaves me to buy the book, the movie, and the Arden DLC. Which in the end begs the question, why did I buy this game and with all the DLC too at that outrageous of a price? And what's worse is that I just bought a PS5 and it came with a free copy of the Royal Edition for new PS5 users. This thing is fucking useless. I don't care that Ray Chase signed the back of this right around the barcode here or something. This is going where it belongs. But I am not spending any more money on this game, especially the lowest common denominator, a book. But I still want to know what actually happens there. And I really don't want to look up the wiki either because I don't really trust them. I know I looked up a wiki just earlier, but...
Looking for this?
Who are you?
Have you forgotten? Ultimate Battle 22?
Ultimate Battle 22.
Wait, Ultimate Battle 22? You're playing that game?
You.
Let's not forget about those mysterious ROM hacks.
We are past the point of negotiation here. You will be reading me the whole damn book here, as I will not spend a single more cent on this damn game.
You do realize you're pointing your gun at a TV, right? Fine, just this once. The flurry of footfalls echoing along the cold couch.
I guess I could use this one for some video at some point.
Are you even listening?
Yeah, Arden good, Bahamut bad, Luna suddenly cool.
Can I go now?
Yeah, sure. Until next time I hold you at gunpoint.
What do you mean the next time you point a gun at me?
So, fuck Square Enix.
So what I neglected to mention so far is that the director of the game, Hajime Tabata, who took over for Nomura in 2013, had tried to make the game go on the right course by adding these DLCs. Of course, Square wouldn't let him do it for free, but he at least was going in the right direction with each of these, getting 4 playable characters, expanded lore on the world, further understanding of the characters. And the man was even about to give us a separate timeline that was about to lead to a more cohesive ending. In this case, you have episode Aranea, the Dragoon Girl, who explores how Star Scourge is hurting the people of the Niflheim Empire, and in this run meets the Niflheim King's daughter, which then leads into episode Luna Freya, where Bahamut tries to revive her with Arden's power, as this is going from an alternate ending from episode Arden, where Arden refuses to listen to Bahamut and let Noctis kill him. And so Luna is to become the new Arden in this case, but she soon becomes wise to Bahamut's plan, so she plots to stand against him and meets up with Aranea and the Niflheim princess. Afterwards, leading to episode Noctis, where Noctis wakes up after the 10-year skip, but in this instance, he had dreams of all the shit that Arden went through, including the betrayal of his brother. And so eventually, Noctis faces off against Arden, who still hates him, but after the battle, Noctis forgives him by knowing his past now, which Arden starts to respect him for that afterwards, all leading them to work together to defeat Bahamut once and for all, with Arden having to sacrifice himself in doing so. The story ending with Noctis surviving, marrying Luna Freya, and living happily ever after. While still a bit convoluted and Bahamut's motivation still being questionable, boy is that a much more cohesive story. So we could have had a proper end to this game, one of the game's greatest flaws, and they screwed us like this by getting rid of the one man who still cared about the game at the company. No wonder all Luminous Productions folded after one game once he was gone.
I know, I've been arguing for the past while why we should not be getting scammed by Square Enix about all these DLCs, but this late into the game, I want a proper conclusion actually to this game that I've been waiting for since 2006.
But even with the so-called proper conclusion, it's still a convoluted mess. Now there are 2 additional timelines, a bunch of media that is required for the main timeline, and 4 DLCs on top of them, and let alone that damn movie too. If they were so hell-bent to remedy all of this, the proper solution would be to integrate all 4 DLCs into the main game, and instead of those 3 that lead into the good ending, use that time and money to instead retcon the movie and make the Insomnia invasion we all wanted, featuring Noctis and his company, playable and canon. This could effectively make it feel at last like a fully self-contained and complete game. But instead, they did the opposite and got even more convoluted. So what happened? Why is this game such a colossal mess? The game was unveiled in 2006, and 10 years later, it turned into this. One, without looking at what happened, would assume that they were hard at work for 10 years straight, but in reality, it's been much less than that. Tetsuya Nomura first started this project alongside Final Fantasy XIII as Final Fantasy Versus 13, a game that challenged the very nature of Final Fantasy XIII. As opposed to light, you got dark. As opposed to a linear world, you got an open world. As opposed to a team of strangers, you got a team of already close friends. As opposed to high fantasy-like worlds, you have a fantasy based on reality. And the list can go on. To someone who wasn't happy with Final Fantasy XIII, this sounded like a dream, and 13 to many was a game that went against everything that felt Final Fantasy in nature, along with how it was being held by major players at Square. Tetsuya Nomura, the director at the time, ran into a number of issues between its announcement and 2013. For one, manpower was too small at Square, not overall, but just to add to this one major project alongside Final Fantasy XIII. Final Fantasy XIII was seen as the next major entry, and so that was taking priority. As such, the team who was working on Versus had to be pulled in order to finish Final Fantasy XIII. Thus, the game was not shown for some time and on hold. New trailers, however, did start coming out after 2 years in 2008. However, all we were still getting was still mostly just CG scenes, no real gameplay. It wasn't until 2010 that we actually started getting some gameplay footage at long last. You'd think Versus was at last making some real progress now that 13 was out, right? Well, yes and no. Yes, that it now had enough done to show some gameplay. But no, cause Final Fantasy XIV was also in development at the same time as 13. While 14 in a normal case wasn't hindering Versus 13's development, 14's initial release did flop. Very, very badly, to the point where Square was starting to hemorrhage a lot of money. So badly, in fact, that they decided to remake the game by pulling staff from other teams, such as Dragon Quest X's Naoki Yoshida, better known now as Yoshi P, to fix it. And so, with how much money the company was losing, Versus 13's development was yet again put on hold to focus on redoing Final Fantasy XIV. The good news was that 14 was saved and it became the best Final Fantasy made in, well, some time at that point, and now the most profitable in the series yet. The bad news, Versus 13 had been seriously delayed by not just being put on hold, but Tetsuya Nomura's attention also being heavily taken away from the project and put on several Kingdom Hearts projects at that time. As such, with how long Versus 13 was put on hold, it was time for the PS4 to come out. The PS3, which had served as Versus 13's main platform of development up till then, was being retired. Square, however, didn't want to leave this game on that old platform and forced it to be ported to the PS4 using their new Luminous engines. Thus came the tedious process of having to remake everything they had done up till then on a whole new engine. It was almost as if all that progress was for nothing. Thus the game stayed quiet after one last CG trailer in 2011. In 2013, however, we got the big and popular reveal at E3 where it was renamed as Final Fantasy XV. The trailer was epic. The music was epic. The story looked cooler than ever. The characters felt fun. And a large amount of gameplay footage was shown. Hopes were now running high that Square was actually going to give it the attention that it deserved after all this time, and that Final Fantasy was now saved. Tetsuya Nomura looked like a true hero at that point. 1 year passed with nothing more heard, but then came out the bad news that Tetsuya Nomura was no longer directing Final Fantasy XV, alongside with much of his team no longer working on it either. Instead, they pulled the portable team led by Hajime Tabata, known best for his work on Crisis Core and Type 0. That didn't sound bad on paper, as his critical success on those made him sound very competent. That was until we got the 2014 trailer. Everything looked very different. The cityscape of Insomnia was nowhere to be seen. The stylish looking gameplay we saw was not around anymore, and now we had a new girl named Luna Freya, who was supposed to be Noctis' lover instead of Stella. What was revealed was that Tabata was required to make a decision on what was to be kept that people were hyped for and what could be removed in order to get the game out in a timely manner. As such, the story was simplified. Luna replaced Stella. Many of the other parts of the game were also cut, including the Niflheim invasion of Insomnia, which was all we had ever seen since 2006. Along with that, the game, which was at one point shown to feature 4 playable characters, now only had Noctis playable. Skepticism was starting to rise as the game was starting to appear worse and worse as time went on. The Insomnia invasion was now being made into a movie instead, and not featuring Noctis, but some nobody named Nyx, and was required to be watched before playing the game so that one understands what is even going on. Then in 2016, the game came out after 10 years, and it disappointed most people rather badly for reasons as explained earlier. As such, to simplify it, it was a combination of massive delays over bad executive decisions to spread the teams thin to make Final Fantasy games that underwhelmed with short development times between 2006 and 2016, which also affected 15 in the end too. And yes, I said short development times, as the realistic development time for Final Fantasy XV may have only been between 3 to 4 years. 4 if you include the remaking of the game in the Luminous engines for a year. Now some might say that 4 years of development sounds like an okay amount of time to make a game, as many good games are made with less time than that. That is very true, but 15's scope was massive. Very massive in fact. It had a complicated story written by an RPG story legend, and directed by a man who directs the most confusing stories of gaming known as Kingdom Hearts, but now in a massive open world set to feature giant cities too. 4 years of development wouldn't cut it. Not even 5. I would estimate if one were to just use the then Luminous Studios team, they'd need at least 7 years to get the game done properly. Already after release, the game saw a number of updates for well over 1 year, which did drastically improve it, including making 4 playable characters at the end of the day, newer story elements, cutscenes, gameplay, and more. This was with a team that was also smaller at roughly 70% of what they had during development, and not all of it was spent on making DLC and updates. Some was spent on working on the online mode Comrades and collaboration events such as the Assassin's Creed event. While a lot of these were already planned before release, a lot were added in just because of the fan backlash. Thus, by the end of 2017, the game did look a lot more solid, but still had a lot of problems to go with it. At that point, it had 5 years of development. If it had gotten another 2 years worth, and as such brought in the Insomnia invasion and maybe some other versus elements, then maybe it could have hit our expectations in the end. However, why did Square only give this game such little development time after the new direction it took in 2012 and 2013? Why hadn't they learned their lessons from their problems with 13 and 14 that a rushed and thin team won't produce proper results? Especially one with such a large scope. They should have pushed to keep it going till potentially 2019, much as Kingdom Hearts 3 did. Classic Final Fantasy could be done very quickly. Overworlds were very small, models weren't so detailed, the stories were far more complicated. They should have made the hard decision of bringing the scope down closer to a classic Final Fantasy, minus the graphics of course, make it so good that it compares to them, and research the brand that way, while still selling cause it's a main series Final Fantasy game. Yet they made the boneheaded decision of trying to make it a massive world just cause the trailers hinted at it, but yet got rid of the many aspects that people were hyped for in the first place, and thus made no one happy. Maybe Square thought that they could simply cash in on the hype, and well, they did. It sold exceptionally well, regardless of fan disappointment. It's like modern Pokemon all over again. I guess the biggest hindrance the game had was its open world. Open world games in general nowadays have been a huge hindrance to a great number of existing series. For the size and manpower required to make a believable and realistic open world, some things have to be cut. With large open worlds, Metal Gear Solid 5 didn't have as many story elements to it, or even an ending for that matter. Due to the extremely large open world, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild had one of the lowest dungeon counts in a main series console Zelda game to date. And while Final Fantasy 15 had to cut numerous corners just to get something going. And out of these three, the closest was The Legend of Zelda in doing it best with having the longest development cycle of the three. And even then had something less than a more traditional Legend of Zelda game. But yet the game was still loved for how well it was done overall. And to further add to that, this was followed up by Tears of the Kingdom that did have a similar development length but used the same engine and thus saved a lot of time and made an even grander game that met expectations even more. Now Square Enix is a very large company and has a massive amount of members. If they did, say, merge some divisions together, it could have been possible to meet Versus 13's expectations within the short time frame. This would mean combining a number of the business divisions that had been splintered over the years to make a mega team in order to get the project done properly and on time. I mean, Square used to not have so many split teams. Back on the PS1, one Final Fantasy game was done at a time. In 2006, 3 were announced at once to be done by 3 different teams, and thus splitting resources hard that way. As well, I know Square Enix is capable of making proper large worlds with many towns and a good story. Dragon Quest XI is a prime example of it. Heck, we don't even need to go far. Final Fantasy XIV under Yoshi P made large worlds with many towns and some of the best Final Fantasy stories yet. In fact, haven't you noticed that Dragon Quest seemingly seems to be the only series from Square Enix without any real controversy or a black sheep of a game? It shows how well managed that it is because they don't split their Dragon Quest teams into multiple smaller teams. It's a dedicated team that pumps out solid game after solid game, blowing past expectations. Some like to blame Hajime Tabata and say he botched Tetsuya Nomura's vision. Some say Nomura was a hack and couldn't manage a team. While both may be true to an extent, the true culprit are the executives at Square for the mismanagement of teams and their unreal expectations around the Final Fantasy brand.
Now, by no means am I calling Final Fantasy 15 a bad game. I know, I ragged on it a lot. And I even threw this in the garbage. But I took it out because I suddenly realized that I actually had some of the signatures of the other voice actors too. However, the gameplay is still quite fun and enjoyable, even though it's very simple and easy. I mean, I played the Wind Waker and I absolutely loved the game, and that game is very easy too.
The exploration of sites were great to see. The bonds between the characters were nice and interesting. And the story, for as half-assed as it was, it's still okay. And just okay. The real reason why myself and many others criticized it is cause of how hyped it was. What was shown taken away, and it being a freaking Final Fantasy main entry, which many of us were starved for a really good one, as it had been a long time since we had gotten a really good one too. Therefore, as a game on its own, it's fairly good and I did enjoy playing it. As a Final Fantasy game, however, it doesn't rank very high in the tier list. I can go back and play a session of 7, 9, 10 and still have a good time. Their gameplay are turn-based, their overworlds are simple, or even non-existent in the case of 10, but yet I find them to be easily better games. Heck, Final Fantasy XIV isn't even made as a single player game, but still functions as a really good single player game next to it. For Square, the best way to avoid such a situation again is to not show off a game so early with no timelines or plans made as to when to complete it, and complete it within a reasonable time to the scale of the project, while still understanding that a game doesn't need such a large scale to succeed. Persona 5, for example, still proved that a concise world within a turn-based gameplay can work very well after all, and that game, in my opinion, outright destroys Final Fantasy XV. At the same time, sticking to action can work as the new Final Fantasy XVI worked. It wasn't a true open world per se, but still had a large world, was an action RPG, and had a very memorable and amazing story, meeting fan expectations for the franchise. I have mentioned Final Fantasy XIV a lot here, and the reason is because it was made by Creative Business Unit 3, led by Yoshi P, who went on to make Final Fantasy XVI. The team was competent, it stuck to its schedule, and made a game that was set to meet fan expectations, and it did just that. Maybe one day in the future we'll see what we wanted with Versus 13. Maybe Viren Rex, that was shown off in Kingdom Hearts 3, but shows Nomura's obsession still with this game.
But at this point, I think it's time for us to move on. Move on to Final Fantasy XVI. The game that actually got it right out of the gate. No DLC required, no external material needed, and best of all, no real controversy, save for you turn-based guys who wants the game to be turn-based, but Square Enix wants it to be action-based because, well, it's still a good game in action form too. But I digress. I'm the Obsessive Gamer, everyone. Thank you for watching.
Also hit the subscribe button and hit the notification bell too for more videos on Final Fantasy and other gaming topics here too. Hit the like button and comment below on if Final Fantasy XV did disappoint you and why. So everyone, thank you for watching.